History of the United States. Welcome to an epic journey through the rich tapestry of American history. From its humble beginnings as a collection of colonies to its current status as a global superpower, the United States has traversed a remarkable path filled with triumphs, challenges, and moments that have shaped the course of human history. Our story begins long before the arrival of European settlers, with the indigenous peoples who inhabited the land for thousands of years. These diverse cultures thrived in harmony with the natural world, developing complex societies, languages, and traditions. However, their way of life would be forever altered with the arrival of European explorers in the 15th and 16th centuries. In the early 17th century, European settlers began to establish permanent colonies along the eastern seaboard of North America. Seeking religious freedom, economic opportunity, and adventure, these pioneers laid the foundation for what would become the United States of America. From the Jamestown settlement in Virginia to the Pilgrims' landing at Plymouth Rock, the seeds of a new nation were sown. Despite facing numerous challenges, including harsh winters, disease, and conflicts with Native American tribes, the colonies persevered and flourished. By the 18th century, a distinct American identity began to emerge, fueled by concepts of liberty, democracy, and self-governance. Tensions between the American colonies and the British Crown came to a head in the late 18th century, leading to the outbreak of the American Revolution in 1775. The rallying cry of no taxation without representation echoed throughout the colonies as patriots took up arms against British tyranny. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, proclaiming the birth of a new nation founded on the principles of freedom and equality. The Revolutionary War tested the resolve of the American people as they fought against the might of the British Empire. Despite facing overwhelming odds, the Continental Army, led by General George Washington, achieved a stunning victory at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777, which helped secure crucial support from France. After years of grueling warfare, the British surrendered at Yorktown in 1781, paving the way for American independence. With independence secured, the newly formed United States faced the daunting task of building a stable and democratic government. In 1787, delegates from the 13 states gathered in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention, where they drafted the U.S. Constitution, a groundbreaking document that established the framework for a federal republic. The principles of checks and balances, separation of powers, and individual rights laid the groundwork for the world's oldest surviving constitutional democracy. The ratification of the Constitution in 1788 marked a pivotal moment in American history as the 13 states came together to form a more perfect union. George Washington, the hero of the Revolutionary War, was unanimously elected as the nation's first president, inaugurating a new era of governance under the principles of the Constitution. His leadership would set important precedents for future presidents to follow. In the early years of the Republic, the United States embarked on a bold experiment in democracy and territorial expansion. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 doubled the size of the young nation, opening up vast new lands for settlement and exploration. President Thomas Jefferson commissioned the famous Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the uncharted territories of the West, further solidifying America's claim to manifest destiny. However, America's westward expansion would not come without its challenges. In 1812, tensions between the United States and Britain erupted into war once again, as the young nation sought to assert its independence and sovereignty. The War of 1812, often referred to as the Second War for Independence, tested the resolve of the American people and reaffirmed their commitment to defending their freedom. The 19th century witnessed a profound transformation of American society and economy as the Industrial Revolution swept across the nation. Advances in technology, transportation, and communication fueled unprecedented economic growth and urbanization. From the textile mills of New England to the steel factories of Pittsburgh, America emerged as an industrial powerhouse on the world stage. Yet, the promise of progress was overshadowed by the dark stain of slavery, which had been ingrained in the fabric of American society since colonial times. The issue of slavery divided the nation along regional and ideological lines, ultimately leading to the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. The conflict pitted the northern states, which sought to preserve the Union and abolish slavery, against the southern states, which fought to defend their way of life and the institution of slavery. The Civil War was a defining moment in American history, testing the very foundations of the nation and costing the lives of over 600,000 soldiers. President Abraham Lincoln, whose leadership and vision guided the Union through its darkest hour, issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, declaring that all slaves in Confederate-held territory were to be set free. The proclamation transformed the Civil War into a moral crusade for freedom and equality. With the end of the Civil War in 1865, the United States faced the monumental task of rebuilding a shattered nation and integrating millions of newly freed slaves into society. The period of Reconstruction saw the passage of constitutional amendments abolishing slavery, granting citizenship and voting rights to African Americans, and laying the groundwork for racial equality. However, the promise of Reconstruction was short-lived, as Southern states enacted Jim Crow laws and other measures to disenfranchise black citizens and enforce racial segregation. As America recovered from the ravages of war, settlers pushed ever westward in search of new opportunities and adventures. The frontier spirit of exploration, self-reliance, and rugged individualism became ingrained in the national psyche, shaping the character of the American West. However, this westward expansion came at a great cost to Native American tribes, whose ancestral lands were seized and whose way of life was threatened by the relentless march of progress. The late 19th century, often referred to as the Gilded Age, was a time of unprecedented wealth and inequality in America. Industrial tycoons like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan amassed vast fortunes through ruthless business practices and exploitation of labor. Meanwhile, millions of immigrants flocked to America's shores in search of a better life, only to find themselves living in overcrowded tenements and working in dangerous factories for meager wages. The excesses of the Gilded Age sparked a wave of social and political reform known as the Progressive Era. Activists and reformers pushed for government intervention to address issues such as corruption, child labor, urban poverty, and women's suffrage. Progressive presidents like Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson enacted sweeping reforms to regulate big business, protect consumers, and expand the role of government in promoting the general welfare. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 plunged Europe into a devastating conflict that would engulf the world in flames. Initially, the United States remained neutral, but as the war dragged on and German aggression threatened American interests, President Woodrow Wilson made the fateful decision to enter the war on the side of the Allies. In April 1917, Congress declared war on Germany, marking America's entry into the Great War. The war effort brought about profound changes in American society as the nation mobilized its resources and manpower to support the Allied cause. Factories churned out weapons and munitions, farms increased food production to feed the troops, and millions of young men enlisted in the armed forces. Meanwhile, women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking on jobs traditionally held by men and playing a vital role in the war effort. The war finally came to an end in November 1918 with the signing of the armistice, but the peace that followed would prove to be short-lived. The Treaty of Versailles, which imposed harsh penalties on Germany and redrew the map of Europe, failed to address the underlying causes of the conflict and sowed the seeds of future instability. Meanwhile, the United States emerged from the war as a global superpower, with its economy booming and its influence on the world stage growing. The 1920s were a time of great prosperity and cultural dynamism in America, as the nation embraced the spirit of innovation, excess, and rebellion. The Roaring Twenties, also known as the Jazz Age, saw the rise of a new urban culture characterized by jazz music, dance crazes, and artistic experimentation. However, beneath the surface of this glittering facade lay deep social tensions and economic inequalities that would soon come to a head. The prosperity of the 1920s came to a crashing halt with the onset of the Great Depression, the worst economic downturn in modern history. The stock market crash of 1929 sent shockwaves throughout the global economy, leading to widespread unemployment, poverty, and despair. Millions of Americans lost their jobs, their homes, and their savings as banks collapsed and businesses shuttered their doors. The Great Depression hit rural America particularly hard, as drought and dust storms ravaged the Great Plains, creating the environmental catastrophe known as the Dust Bowl. Farmers were forced off their land, and migrant workers traveled west in search of work, only to find squalid living conditions and low wages. The human toll of the Depression was immense, leaving scars that would... In the midst of the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt launched a series of ambitious programs and reforms known as the New Deal. Through legislation such as the Social Security Act, the National Labor Relations Act, and the Works Progress Administration, Roosevelt sought to provide relief, recovery, and reform to the American people. His bold and innovative approach to governance reshaped the role of the federal government and laid the groundwork for the modern welfare state. As the clouds of war gathered over Europe in the late 1930s, the United States found itself once again on the brink of conflict. The rise of totalitarian regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan posed a grave threat to the principles of democracy and freedom. Despite widespread isolationism and reluctance to intervene in foreign conflicts, the United States gradually began to rearm and support allied nations in their fight against aggression. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, shocked the nation and propelled the United States into World War II. Overnight, America was thrust into a global conflict that would test its resolve, its resources, and its commitment to the principles of liberty and democracy. President Roosevelt declared war on Japan the following day, marking the beginning of America's involvement in the largest and deadliest conflict in human history. World War II was a total war that touched every corner of the globe and affected the lives of millions of people. The United States mobilized its vast industrial capacity and manpower to support the Allied cause, producing weapons, vehicles, and supplies on an unprecedented scale. American troops fought bravely on multiple fronts, from the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific, liberating nations from tyranny and oppression. The war effort brought about profound changes in American society as the nation mobilized its resources and manpower to support the Allied cause. Factories churned out weapons and munitions, farms increased food production to feed the troops, and millions of young men enlisted in the armed forces. Meanwhile, women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking on jobs traditionally held by men and playing a vital role in the war effort. In 1945, the United States emerged victorious from World War II, but at a tremendous cost in human lives and suffering. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which brought about the surrender of Japan, marked the dawn of the nuclear age and forever changed the course of history. The devastation wrought by these weapons of mass destruction underscored the urgent need for international cooperation and diplomacy to prevent future conflicts. The end of World War II ushered in a new era of global geopolitics defined by the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War, as it came to be known, was characterized by ideological, political, and military competition between the two superpowers as they vied for influence and dominance on the world stage. The specter of nuclear annihilation loomed large, as both sides raced to develop ever more powerful weapons of mass destruction. The Cold War was marked by numerous proxy conflicts and crises that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The Berlin Airlift, the Korean War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis were just a few of the flashpoints that tested the resolve and diplomacy of American leaders. The doctrine of containment, articulated by President Harry Truman, guided U.S. foreign policy as the nation sought to prevent the spread of communism and uphold the principles of democracy and freedom. While the United States was engaged in the global struggle against communism, it faced its own internal challenges to democracy and equality. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s was a pivotal moment in American history, as African Americans and their allies fought to dismantle segregation and discrimination and secure equal rights under the law. Led by courageous activists like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and John Lewis, the movement achieved landmark victories such as the desegregation of schools, the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The 1960s were a decade of profound social, cultural, and political upheaval in America. The civil rights struggle, the anti-war movement, and the feminist movement challenged the status quo and forced the nation to confront its deepest divisions and injustices. The Vietnam War, in particular, became a lightning rod for controversy and dissent as millions of Americans protested against U.S. involvement in the conflict and the human toll it exacted. The 1960s also witnessed the emergence of a vibrant counterculture that rejected mainstream values and embraced alternative lifestyles and beliefs. The hippie movement, with its emphasis on peace, love, and communal living, captivated the imagination of millions of young people and fueled a revolution in art, music, and fashion. Rock and roll music, with its rebellious spirit and infectious energy, became the anthem of a generation and helped to define the cultural landscape of the era. However, the optimism and idealism of the 1960s were tempered by the disillusionment and cynicism of the 1970s. The Watergate scandal, which revealed widespread corruption and abuse of power at the highest levels of government, shook the nation to its core and eroded public trust in political institutions. The resignation of President Richard Nixon in 1974 marked the end of an era and raised profound questions about the nature of democracy and the rule of law. The 1980s saw the rise of conservatism and the ascendancy of Ronald Reagan to the presidency. Reagan's vision of limited government, free markets, and a strong national defense resonated with millions of Americans who were disillusioned with the perceived excesses of the welfare state and the perceived weakness of American leadership on the world stage. Reagan's policies, often referred to as Reaganomics, ushered in an era of deregulation, tax cuts, and military buildup that transformed the political landscape and set the stage for decades of partisan conflict. The late 1980s and early 1990s witnessed the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, marking the triumph of democracy and capitalism over communism. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the dawn of a new era of peace and freedom in Europe, while the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 brought an end to decades of global tension and uncertainty. The United States emerged from the Cold War as the world's sole superpower, with unparalleled military, economic, and cultural influence. However, America's status as a global superpower came with its own set of responsibilities and challenges. In 1990, President George H.W. Bush led a coalition of nations in the Gulf War to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi aggression and defend the principles of international law and sovereignty. The successful operation demonstrated America's military prowess and commitment to upholding peace and security in the Middle East and beyond. The 1990s were a decade of unprecedented technological innovation and economic growth, as the internet revolutionized the way we live, work, and communicate. The dot-com boom fueled a frenzy of investment and speculation in the burgeoning tech industry, creating vast fortunes overnight and reshaping the global economy. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft emerged as titans of industry, leading the charge into the digital age. The dawn of the new millennium was marked by tragedy and upheaval with the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. The coordinated attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon shocked the nation and the world, claiming the lives of nearly 3,000 innocent people and plunging America into a state of mourning and outrage. In response, President George W. Bush declared a global war on terror, pledging to hunt down and defeat the perpetrators of the attacks and their supporters wherever they may be. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, launched in the aftermath of 9/11, would become the defining conflicts of the early 21st century. The United States and its allies toppled the Taliban regime in Afghanistan and ousted Saddam Hussein's dictatorship in Iraq. But the subsequent nation-building efforts and counterinsurgency campaigns proved to be far more challenging and costly than anticipated. The wars dragged on for years, exacting a heavy toll in blood and treasure and raising difficult questions about America's role in the world and the limits of its power. The economic prosperity of the early 21st century came to a crashing halt with the onset of the global financial crisis in 2008. The collapse of the housing market and the failure of major financial institutions sent shockwaves throughout the global economy, triggering the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Millions of Americans lost their jobs, their homes, and their savings as the financial system teetered on the brink of collapse. The crisis exposed deep-seated flaws in the regulatory framework and the unchecked greed and speculation that had fueled them. In the midst of economic turmoil and uncertainty, Americans turned to a new leader to guide them through the challenges ahead. In 2008, Barack Obama made history by becoming the first African-American president of the United States, inspiring millions of people with his message of hope and change. Obama's presidency was marked by landmark achievements such as the Affordable Care Act, the legalization of same-sex marriage, and the historic nuclear deal with Iran. However, his administration also faced fierce opposition from Republicans and struggled to address issues such as income inequality, immigration reform, and racial tensions. The election of Barack Obama was a watershed moment in American politics, but it also laid bare the deep divisions and resentments that had long simmered beneath the surface of society. The rise of populism and political polarization fueled a backlash against the political establishment and traditional norms of governance. The Tea Party movement, Occupy Wall Street, and the election of Donald Trump as president in 2016 were all manifestations of this growing discontent and anger. The presidency of Donald Trump was one of the most polarizing and contentious periods in modern American history. Trump's unorthodox style, divisive rhetoric, and controversial policies upended decades of political norms and conventions, sparking fierce debates and protests across the country. His administration pursued an agenda of deregulation, tax cuts, and immigration restrictions, while also facing numerous scandals and investigations, including allegations of collusion with Russia during the 2016 election. However, the greatest challenge of the Trump presidency came in the form of a global pandemic that would change the course of history. In early 2020, the novel coronavirus, known as COVID-19, began to spread rapidly around the world, causing widespread illness, death, and economic disruption. The United States, like many other countries, struggled to contain the virus and mitigate its impact, leading to a staggering loss of life and livelihoods. The pandemic laid bare deep-seated inequalities and vulnerabilities in American society, exacerbating existing divisions and exposing the shortcomings of the nation's healthcare system and leadership. The COVID-19 pandemic also reignited long-standing debates about race, justice, and inequality in America. The brutal killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other unarmed Black Americans at the hands of police sparked nationwide protests and demands for systemic change. The Black Lives Matter movement, with its calls for racial justice and police reform, galvanized millions of people across the country and forced a reckoning with America's legacy of racism and injustice. In the midst of a global pandemic and social unrest, Americans went to the polls in November 2020 to choose their next president. In a bitterly contested election, Joe Biden emerged victorious, defeating Donald Trump and becoming the 46th president of the United States. Biden's presidency began at a time of unprecedented challenges and divisions, but he pledged to unite the country, heal its wounds, and restore America's standing on the world stage. In his first year in office, President Biden faced a daunting array of challenges, from the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic to the economic fallout from the crisis to the urgent need to combat climate change. His administration pursued an ambitious agenda to build back better, investing in infrastructure, healthcare, education, and renewable energy. Biden also sought to restore America's alliances and partnerships around the world, reaffirming the nation's commitment to democracy, human rights, and multilateral cooperation. As we stand on the threshold of a new era in American history, we are faced with profound questions about the direction of our nation and the world. The challenges we face are daunting, but so too are the opportunities to build a more just, equitable, and sustainable future for generations to come. The story of America is still being written, and it is up to each and every one of us to shape its destiny. So, I invite you, dear viewers, to join me in celebrating the rich tapestry of American history and the ideals that have inspired generations of Americans to dream big and pursue their goals. If you enjoyed this journey through the annals of time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating content. Like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts and insights, and most importantly, share it with your friends and family. Together, let's continue to explore the past, understand the present, and shape the future. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.